Good morning and welcome to this sunny Sunday morning. I finally got a sunny one and there's been no rain in sight this morning, so I'm hoping it's the same for everybody. Today, I'm joined by Leanne, Christopher and John, and we've got three good, interesting stories for you. Our first one isn't overly teaching related, but I think it does impact us, and I think it impacts kind of what's been going on. We've got the Guardian have done the UK children shorter, fatter and sicker amid poor diet and poverty reports find. So the Food Foundation says that height of 5-year-olds is falling, child obesity is up by a third, and type 2 diabetes by a fifth. So we've got some really interesting kind of stats coming up. And I think obviously we've seen a massive rise in using food banks that we've talked about more recently. And is this impacting kind of the type of child that we're getting in schools? And also that whole thing of the role of the teacher, we're having to deal with a lot more. We're having to cope with all of this. Or is this kind of post-COVID that they are just getting sicker because there's more viruses around? But I know certainly my child's had 3 sicknesses bugs in kind of 2 months, and we haven't had any for a good couple of years. So I don't know whether it's just that those bugs haven't been around, or that it's just this kind of, we haven't quite got back to that nice healthy thing, or is it that we're not getting outside and there's like the digital thing that was talked about earlier in the week on Teacher Talk Radio? Leanne, I'll go to you first. What do you make of this?
I do think we're comparing different children from the past and past generations. I think, like you say, there is a digital age and there's this constant need from children to be entertained instantly, and that possibly they're not running around outside as much as we used to, or not able to just entertain themselves without devices and without resources. I see that quite a bit at the moment.
What about you, John? What do you make of this story?
Well, I would like to think that it was some sort of temporary thing that was a result of lockdown or something of that kind, because quite a lot is. I mean, there's a lot going in schools at the moment that was caused by this most extraordinary shutdown of schools and working from home and so on. But I think something much worse is going on. When the height of 7-year-olds is falling, you know, that's something that is not been seen in this country since before the Second World War. It's a very unusual and very worrying thing. And I think it relates to things like children are being taken. One of the commonest reasons children go into hospital is to have rotten teeth removed. Or it relates to what Leanne was saying there is, you know, children coming to school, they're not prepared, or a story we had the other week, not prepared for school, they can't speak well, they aren't potty trained and so on, all those sorts of things. There's something, and I would point to things, I mean, the aggressive marketing of junk food has been mentioned a lot in the press, but also the general sort of atomization of the family in this country, of the change in the way people are time poor. Lots of people are materially quite okay. They can feed themselves, but they are time poor. And when you're time poor, you turn to poor quality instant food, and people are working all the hours. And I'd like to see a change in this, really. I think Labour's emphasis on growing the economy, I hope that doesn't mean more flexible working, more people out to work, more undermining of ordinary family life. And I think a lot of that is leading to poor diets in instant food. I've been in supermarkets where you see parents walking around with kids saying, "What do you want tonight?" And they point to various things and take home a pizza.
And that's the thing. Are we now the generation where potentially our kids and our parents aren't necessarily getting the cooking skills? They don't have the repertoire to be able to do more nutrient-rich food, using more raw ingredients so they keep the nutritional value. Everything is all about being preserved and having more salt and sugar and things in it. I know Catherine from the head from Michaela School was on the news the other week, and she said about how one of the policies was about giving all kids free meals at school, and she was like, no, because that's a waste of funding. It should just be for those kids that can't afford it. But I actually think there's an argument in this sense that, do we give these kids a nice healthy meal, so at least we know that one of their meals is really nutrient rich, and actually we say no food in school, no junk food, and we as a school are controlling what goes into them? What do you make of this, Christopher?
Well, that's pretty much my angle, actually. I have to say I'm personally fed up of seeing reports of the processed food industry is putting more and more fat-rich, salt-dense, sugar-drenched, nutrient-poor junk food on the plates of our citizens, however old they might be, as each year passes. But particularly frustrating to see that this is the future generation here that aren't really being given the best start. I mean, the government currently spends about £1 billion a year on free school meals, and extending free school meals to everybody in state education would probably come to a bill of about 2.5 billion, which isn't a considerable step up from 1 billion, is it? The Faculty of Public Health have also looked into this problem in a paper that they published in January 2024, and suggested that this policy intervention alone would significantly improve children's diets and generate an economic return of about £1.38 to £1.71 for each £1 spent on the policy. So to me, it seems to be quite obvious that this should be the way we go. Yes, I recognise that some might say that this idea is yet another unwelcome expansion of the education sector's responsibility to deliver social welfare. But if we're honest, what recent changes in education policy in the last 10 years haven't done this? I think we need to move on now from keeping children safe in education to keeping children fed in education, so that they don't become the adults needing significant medical intervention in our hard-pressed health system later on. I think this is where we need to go. I hear the disagreements from various parts of the sector, but I think they're misguided in this case.
I completely agree, because I think actually if we are feeding those kids and making sure they're healthy, at least it's one kind of warm, healthy meal, then we know, and also their snack intake as well and their sugar intake in school, then we know that they're at least having that healthy thing. And there is that going to be that less pressure on the NHS later on when they develop these things. Like, I can't believe how high diabetes has increased, but it's also that thing as well. If they're cooking for the whole entire school, then all of that can be bought fresh ingredients in bulk that is going to be cheaper to cook. It's not going to be that much to upscale it. And actually, is that going to help kind of the population by having one less thing that every parent has to try and organise in the mornings and sort before they go to school? But it's certainly an interesting concept. John, do you want to add to that?
I'll just add one anecdote, and that is that I was at school during the sort of Jamie Oliver period when there was a lot of emphasis on healthy eating, and our school, the school I was at, introduced lots of fresh vegetables and said it's only chips once a week and so on, or once a fortnight. By the time I left that school, because of pressure to make the provision of food profitable, because they felt they wanted more kids to buy more stuff, it was pizzas at break time, and it was chips whenever you wanted them. And see kids walk around with those typically English pizzas, which is basically a dough covered in a sort of glistening film of fat, and walking around at break time before lunch with their piece of English pizza, which would horrify any Italian.
Yeah, it certainly has. It's changed quite a lot, hasn't it, in terms of what they're eating. I've been at a school that had a salad bar and they nailed it, and it was really good. And actually teachers and students both used it. And it was that we also good modelling of what to eat at lunch and things like that. So it can be done right. And also I know Joe Wicks was recently in the news about talking about ADHD in food. And although obviously ADHD is not linked to food, it can be kind of made worse or better depending on the foods that you eat. So we're controlling it in that respect. But it needs a new Jamie Oliver slant, doesn't it? A new focus and getting rid of those chicken nuggets and pizzas that are crept back in. But thank you for that. We're going to story number 2. So our second story is about the Panorama documentary, Undercover School. So this was a documentary where that they looked at a school in the Wirral where it cost local authorities £50,000 or more a year per pupil. But the reporter, Sasha Hines, she went undercover as a work experience and saw little teaching going on. Instead, pupils were mocked and bullied and physically abused. Undercover filming showed children with ADHD, autism and complex needs were placed in headlocks or wrestled to the ground by staff and described as thick and retards. The school says it as an extreme academic record takes any allegations of misconduct or inappropriate behaviour extremely seriously, and some members of staff have been suspended. I know Ofsted went in as well as an emergency trigger as well, but they were previously graded as good, but we know Ofsted gradings is just a title. There's not, you can't really read between the lines, but it's quite a shocking kind of revelation. John, what do you make of this story?
It's just jaw-dropping, isn't it? That when you watch that panorama, it gets worse and worse. Okay, rogue members of staff, hopefully not well trained, something like that. No, much worse. Coming from the top, when you see the executive director or whatever his name was at the school bragging about he's one day going to run 100 schools and he's going to make a mint of money and so on, and you realise the whole thing has been taken over by spivs and crooks, really. And it's something rotten in the way we've allowed these people and that culture. And it appears in the post office scandal. It appears in hospitals where they pursue whistleblowers with a ruthless bullying. Something has happened desperately wrong, desperately badly to our sense of public life, to service, to modesty, to serving for the sake of serving. And for a culture where you say, well, we judge the quality of how we do things by how we treat the weakest, not the opportunity to make some money. And that, unfortunately, is what comes across this. It comes out of that Wirral school. It wasn't simply poor training, understaffing, or any of those things that you might imagine might happen in any organisation. Well, if they're properly funded. But it was something altogether more awful about the culture. And we literally you just couldn't believe it. It makes you despair of mankind.
It is exactly that. It's the, how is people like that getting away with being like that in education? Because it must be, granted, you sometimes get a bad egg, but normally that's reported and dealt with quite quickly. For me, it's like there must have been quite a wide culture of it to have seen it in such a prolific way across it. Leanne, what did you make of it?
I think the whole program in itself, I know there's been other shows like Educating Manchester and Educating Yorkshire, and those were going into schools and showing what school life was like, but almost from a different angle. And I feel like it probably maybe puts the interest of a TV show sometimes ahead of the children's interests in a way.
It's exactly that. It's gone for the shock factor, isn't it?
Yeah. Headline grabbing, and a lot of education is like that. But yeah,
I've got friends that work in kind of special schools and PRUs and things, and it can be brutal. Like, you can't, like, my friend gets called every name under the sun, gets spat at, get kicked at. Like, it can be really difficult. I do think it takes a specific person to kind of work in that school, but it is really important that they have the training in how to deal with those situations. It very much feels like they've lacked that kind of understanding of what these children's needs are and how to deal with them. Christopher, what did you make of the situation over there?
Well, I should say I haven't seen the Panorama documentary, so I can't comment on anything that was in that. But from what I've read, no one comes out of this reported situation with much credit, really. Obviously, unprofessional and potentially criminal behaviour should be investigated and acted upon in a proper way. So I wonder how long the documentary makers actually sat upon this evidence before reporting it. That was also quite a significant concern for me. In terms of the school itself, is there a case for more frequent and longer inspection visits of small schools that work with the most vulnerable students in what are often residential settings? Well, probably. I mean, if you visit a residential special needs school that is doing its job well, then you can usually feel its commitment to its cooling in its classrooms, in its canteens, in its playground, in its living quarters, and importantly, in its staff room. Something, as John said, seems to have gone badly wrong here, and I hope that a full investigation quickly identifies how the practice that has been reported can be rooted out of our education system, because, from what I've heard, that doesn't sound like education to me.
No, and there is, like, generally in education, for those people that aren't aware, like, if you're in that kind of setting, you normally have restraint training. I know my mum worked in a school like that, and she had that restraint training even all the way up into her 70s. Like, so there are ways that you have to strain. So I don't know whether potentially they've seen that and it's not necessarily how it's quite gone, and in the situation is always very different, but certainly the language that's been used is really quite shocking. And I think, like you said, I hope that something's done and those children get the kind of stuff that they deserve and the care that they deserve. But certainly in terms of how much was kind of cut and edited and used for kind of entertainment, and was it quickly enough to be resolved is a good question. We're just going to have a little quick look at our sponsors, because we're so grateful of all the lovely sponsors we've got at the moment, and then we'll move on to our third story.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Have you ever heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now it's a reality with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised, socialised platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively, or with their peers, or with their new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Easy4U is where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience. By eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology, Easy4U isn't just providing tools, they are shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more.
Fabulous. And our third story, well, it's really two stories in one, but I just found them quite interesting. We've got the first one is about a school in Great Yarmouth. This is a sixth form college that is shutting or pausing after 2 years of opening. So there is Sir Isaac Newton in Norwich, which is an incredibly successful sixth form. They've had amazing results with lots of kids going off to Cambridge and Oxford and have been a real success in opening. So they opened another one, Sir Isaac Newton East Sixth Form in Great Yarmouth, as part of the Charter Academy there. But they're running a small school, sixth form in Great Yarmouth, presented a challenge. So just by the sounds of it, just doesn't have the kind of pupil uptake. So they've paused it, and those kids are going to be going to the school in the city until they then re-equip that. And at the same time, we've got another one. We've got the free school set up in wrong place at wrong time in closure. So that was reported by Schools Week. The government faces a losing nearly £500,000 by a troubled free school that waited 4 years to move into its £35 million permanent home, but will now close due to unsustainable pupil numbers. And that was in Parkfield School in Bournemouth, and it had warned that it's struggling to compete with the other free schools that opened 3 years ago. So it seems to be we've got two schools. That's quite a lot of money and funding gone in to set these schools up that seem to have not quite worked in the way that they were hoping for. Christopher, I know you've got strong thoughts on this. What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, for me, based on what we've said already, how much of that money that's been wasted could have been put towards free school meals for all students in schools. But moving on from that, I mean, I'll deal with the Great Yarmouth situation first. This is a slightly strange one and seems to be on the surface of it quite a serious waste of public money. I mean, what kind of research and planning went into founding this school in the first place? If you look at the Department for Levelling Up's own statistics on Great Yarmouth, you can see quite plainly the challenges of opening a small sixth form centre in that particular area, where the median age of residents in the Great Yarmouth Local Authority area is 46, compared with an All England average age of 39. On top of this, students in the local area have to cycle for 10 minutes longer than the average student in England to reach NAFE College. So first question I'd have is, where did the founders think their students would be coming from, given the demographics of the area? So in a deprived, isolated coastal community like Great Yarmouth, and we have a few of them up here too in North Yorkshire where I am, education planners really need to be sitting down and asking how high quality institutions within a reasonable travel time can be supported in extending their reach and levelling up educational opportunity for all. In this case, it sounds like the obvious solution would be to spend some more money on transporting people to Norwich, and the considerable cost that's been thrown away as a result of not taking that decision is quite appalling, really. It's a similar story on the case of the free school. Better planning is needed to make sure that the education resources that are made available to the community are required by the community. In principle, I don't have any objection to free schools as an idea, but we do need to put them where they're needed, and they do need to be making proper use of public funding. I mean, as we've already said, there's a multitude of things we could be spending money on in education. Throwing it away is unconscionable.
I think that's the thing. A lot of these seem to be, because I'm not far down the road from Great Yarmouth, and it is that a lot of the schools, the kids have to bus in. Like my old school, majority of the kids were bused into school. They didn't live locally. They all live in these rural little villages that are quite hard to get anywhere. So it is really difficult. How do we get these kids into kind of sixth forms? A lot of them will travel. Like my current school doesn't have a sixth form. Those kids are going to have to travel 45 minutes to an hour to get into the city to be able to go to a sixth form, or certainly one that fits the criteria that they want to go to. There's a couple. I think there's one slightly closer one, but it's not necessary. And there's another one but it's more just arts based. So it depends what the students want, where they have to go. But I feel like they should be entitled to more choice. It's like that. There's lots of primary schools and there's a few secondary schools, and the sixth forms just seem to be getting smaller, reducing kind of options. It's quite difficult of where they go. John, what do you make of this?
Well, as Chris points out, it's an egregious waste of money. It's a mind-boggling lack of planning and foresight. My elder daughter works as a planner in London. Planning, it's complicated. The big plans take years to form. She plans the environment and hospital provision and traffic has to be integrated with housing plans for the future. These are revised again and again and again. Housing is difficult. Sorry, planning is difficult. Planning is complicated, and this seems to be a disastrous lack of foresight. And I would point to the whole idea of free schools and multi-academy trusts and the kind of Wild West that we have in the governance and management of schools in this country. It's been opened up to a misguided ideological belief that the marketplace solves everything and things will naturally fall into place. I remember when a trust took over a school I was at many years ago, and the trust presented themselves as sort of, we're the new management to the school, and they introduced themselves to the assembled staff. And when you went, because we all madly Googled their backgrounds, and it turns out they were the sorts of people that had done a bit of education, a bit of teaching, and they'd done that, the kind of careers where they'd hopped from elevator to elevator on, advisors to this and consultants to that. And now they're running a school. And then they did quite badly. And they were criticized later on for hiring themselves as their own consultants and dodgy financial practices like that. And the enormous salaries that trust leaders have. It's an odd, Wild West mess. And I hope that we bring some sensible, thoughtful planning to the way we manage schools and organize schools in this country. And this just seems to be examples of it. And I bet there's lots and lots more wasted money out there. That this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, these two seem to have come out coinciding on the same week. It will be interesting to know how many kind of have had all this funding and not come to fruition, because it is just such a large amount of money, especially when there's so many deficits. And I think it's about 40% of schools are going to be in a deficit this year. But then how much that money could go on to retaining staff, not making staff redundant, and keeping staff in education. I know the Bournemouth one was all about kind of, they moved the school from to an out of town site by the airport, where it was previously kind of more of a town centre school. And I think also that's the issue, isn't it? Is that transport links have really kind of decreased in the last few years. So it's getting, how do these kids get there? If there isn't really easy transport routes that are regular, especially those kids that struggle to get out of bed in the morning, you want to be able to make sure they can get there. And sixth form, the timetable is more flexible, and sometimes they have part-time jobs. The sixth form has to work around them, and the school has to work around. The kids have to be able to get there, get back at various times of the day if they're staying for after school activities. Otherwise, they're not going to get those benefits. And I think that's the thing. Like, it's harder and more expensive to do a city centre school, isn't it? Because they cost more money, and the buildings are going to cost more money. The land's going to cost more money. But is it that? And I was part of a school that was set up a few years ago, and it was like us. We just had, when I joined, we had 7, 8s and 12s and 13s, but it was that reputation. It was trying to really lure people in and make sure they really understood what they were getting as a sixth form. And as the reputation came around, then more kids would apply. But it is that it takes quite a few years to kind of build a reputation. Have they quit too early, Leanne? What do you think?
I think I agree with everything that Christopher and John have said. I'm not sure quit too early. I guess, like John said, where was the town planning before it was all built and before everything was changed? It doesn't seem like there's been any long-term plan, short-term plan of, what if the community changes? Is it the right community to build this kind of school? I think there's been, in terms of the students this year, like so much upheaval of students related to building, not even teachers, not even education related to buildings. And I imagine there's still RAC problems going on in schools. And why wasn't that money spent on that? And it's again a question of funding and where they're putting money for schools, which seems to be the issue quite a lot this year.
I definitely agree. I think like maybe investing in the schools that we do have, making them larger, making their facilities better.
Yeah, they're not planning where they put the money. It doesn't seem with like foresight. So
I'll just add something.
Yeah.
Can I add? Yeah, I'll just add as well that with free schools, there's an awful lot of money goes into making free schools work, because it is a political choice that they should work. So a lot of money is thrown at free schools. It's a bit like having bananas. You can grow bananas on top of Snowdon if you want. You can build it. It can be done if you throw enough money at it. And so you just have to make the free school work because you want them to work. So a lot of money is thrown away on an ideological belief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see whether there's any more that pop up before the end of the year. We'll see. Now we're going to move on to our shows of the week. And we'll go to Leanne. Who is your show of the week this week?
Mine was the Friday Twilight Show with Claire Cannon, was titled Wellbeing, Leadership and Coaching. It was about a story of burnout, coaching, and then out of teaching and then back into teaching. And one of the comments that I noticed that stuck with me was that you don't know you're burnt out till it's too late. So it was a real discussion of like burning out and then a journey back into teaching post burnout. So
I certainly think this time of year as well, it's a really important listen in kind of gauging where are you? You've got a few weeks left and then recharge. But if you're doing that year in, year out, are you going to burn out too soon? How do you protect yourself? John, what was your show of the week?
Yeah, before I say that, I'll just agree, Leanne, by the way. As a retired teacher, I didn't know how tired I was until I retired. It was like, oh, goodness me, this is a different. My wife said to me, "You're different. You've changed. I haven't seen this for decades." Oh, never mind. Sorry about that depressing thought. Anyway, the show I'd like to recommend, Hannah, it was your show with Tom Rogers. You co-presented this with 3 expert guests on AI, and it was a really interesting discussion because it's a discussion we really need to be having right now. I remember reading the work of Neil Postman many years ago about when new technologies come in, they often have unintended consequences in creating more work than they're supposed to. They always presented as ways of solving problems and reducing work. They often have the opposite. And I think AI is interesting because it might not be that. It might actually be something that can elevate practice. It might be something that is actually going to help with the work of teaching in ways as yet not fully resolved. It was a great discussion and well worth listening to.
Yeah, and that was brought to in partnership with Teaching How To's, which is one of our sponsors, and their website's great. You can kind of see all the different ways of doing learning. So if you want different strategies for kind of entry routines and stuff, but it has this AI component. So you can say, I'm going to teach a year 7 swimming lesson. It's the first time they've swum, and it will literally talk through how to kind of do the entry into the pool and getting them set up. So it's one of those, again, talking about workload and burnout. It's so clever, and the more detail you put, the more it changes and stuff. For like, I'm fascinated by where I'm a bit nervous about kind of getting into it, but I feel like there's so much more to learn from it. So it'll be interesting to see where teaching goes. Christopher, what was your show?
Well, I'd like to recommend John's show actually on the Falkland Islands Community School, which is a school I've often looked at slightly longingly when the TES adverts have come up from time to time. As the Royal Marine son of a Royal Marine son myself, the Falklands has long had a fascination for me. In fact, my father was stationed in Port Stanley during the 70s and the early 80s, I think. It was great to hear the current principal's vision for the school and the island community it serves, and actually the practical challenges of living in the South Atlantic were quite entertaining to hear about too. It was a really fascinating and eye-opening programme, and well worth your time if you want to know more about English education beyond our borders, and hear what I thought was a wonderfully tactful response to the Argentina question.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. And my show of the week is how can a unified approach to digital skills and computing benefit schools. So this one was by Harry Walters, and he was going through this with Apps for Good, who are providers of free introductory computing courses for both primary and secondary students, and also free computing courses for teachers as well, and not just computing teachers of any caliber who want to know more about how to compute. And they have like this great thing as well for Apps for Good, creating teaching kids own courses to do with those. So you can check them out there at www.appsforgood.org, and you can have a little watch of Harry's show and kind of learn more about that. So we've had some great shows this week, and we've got loads more coming up in the works on our we're not stopping, we're not slowing down before summer, we're still going. And just a reminder of our lovely sponsors. We've got John Catt Educational, and you can get 20% off with our code TR2425. We've got Teaching How To's, who we talked about their sponsored show. So if you want to know more about them, you can go and have a look at that. We've got Apps for Good as well. Again, go watch Harry's show if you want to know more about them. And we've got Easy for You as well. But thank you, everybody, for joining us on this sunny Sunday. I hope you can go outside and enjoy the sunshine for the rest of the day. And we've only got a few more weeks going, so you stay strong. And I think next weekend we're going to have a lovely political weekly review and have a little bit of a change to the schedule. So if you want to watch and hear our thoughts on that, make sure you tune into that. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Christopher. And thank you, John. Have a lovely week.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused